So this is the first video I'm going to do in a series of videos about database objects. And to begin with, I'm just going to start with a simple example of mapping a single database table to some objects and how that works with the framework. So I'm going to use the Northwind database that's available from Microsoft's website. I'm going to use the Microsoft Access version here. Before we get into that, I'm going to just create a new project. I'm going to create a Northwind model. Add in the DatabaseObjects library. Now this is available on GitHub. Just search for DatabaseObjects. So assuming you've downloaded the source code, I will probably do this on NuGet at some point as well, but assuming you've downloaded the source code from GitHub, I'll add a reference to that. Okay, so we've got pretty much a clean slate. We've got just a class library, and to begin with, I'm going to map the suppliers table in the Northwind database to some classes. So the basic concept to be applied here is in order to map this table, we need to create two classes. One class is going to represent the collection, and one class is going to represent each record in the collection. So I'll hop back to here and we'll create a new suppliers collection. So essentially the simplest way to begin with anyway is to inherit from database objects, and we can specify a supplier, which we haven't created yet, and we need to pass in a database. So there is a database class in DatabaseObjects which obviously represents a database. It's not necessarily a connection. It's just it will manage the opening and closing connections internally and transaction management as well. So obviously this class or this table is connected to a database, so it just needs to know what database it is. So pass through database. Okay, so there's a couple of ways that you can map things in database objects. You can use attributes, but most of the time you can also override functions. So sometimes it's useful to override functions for various reasons. To begin with, I'm just going to use attributes because it's a bit clearer. But sometimes that, for some reasons it's not always doesn't always work because you might want to programmatically do different things depending on different situations. So there's still that flexibility there. So anyway, to begin with, I'm going to map to the suppliers table. So this just tells it what table it is, and I'm going to I also need to set up a distinct field. So the distinct field in this case is going to be the supplier ID. So this field is essentially how each object, or in this case each supplier, is uniquely identified within this collection. If there is a subset set up on this collection, i.e. this collection here, the suppliers collection, doesn't necessarily represent the entire table, then it must be that must be the unique field within that collection or that subset of the table. In this situation, we're just mapping the entire table, so supplier ID is unique within this entire table, and so that's all we need to do. There's also another option on here to indicate that this is actually an identity field or it's an auto-incrementing field, so that when a new supplier is created and saved, inserted into the table, it grabs out the ID and puts that into the supplier object for us automatically. Okay, so they're essentially the two things that need to be set up every time. There's a whole bunch of other options which I'll go into shortly, but to begin with, I think that should suffice. So if we go to the supplier class, similar situation to the collection, just inherit from a particular class called DatabaseObject. So again, this is going to represent our record in the supplier table. I'm going to create a couple of properties. It's going to represent just a few fields in that table. Obviously, you could represent every field if you wished. I'm going to copy the contact name as well. Okay, so in and of itself, that's not going to do anything. We need to actually map these properties to the field names. You can use attributes or you can override some functions, but to begin with, I'll just specify some field mapping attributes. So the field name is actually the same as the property name, in this case company name, and the same for contact name. We also need to pass through the reference to the parent collection, because it needs to know, for example, if you're saving this supplier class, it needs to know what table it's inserting it to, and it needs to grab that distinct ID or that supplier ID and put it into this supplier class. So it needs to have that reference to the parent collection. So we need to pass through the suppliers collection. That's all you need to do, and that'll handle all the rest for you automatically. Okay, so what I thought I'd first start off with anyway is just to enumerate through this database table and demonstrate that. So I think we've got essentially everything set up. So what I'm going to do is create a new project. Oops, a new project. Let's call it a Northwind demo. Console app. Set a reference to both the projects. Okay, and first thing to do is create a database object. So there are a whole bunch of wrappers for different database engines. I'm going to be using Microsoft Access here. So there's a Microsoft Access database here, and very simple option to simply pass through the path. Okay, so that's the connection to the database. I'm going to create a new suppliers collection. Northwind model suppliers, pass through the database. Okay, so now we've created a collection. We've created this suppliers object. In and of itself, that won't do anything. So what we want to do really to begin with anyway is to enumerate through this collection. And to do that, we actually need to change this a little bit and add an IEnumerable supplier and implement that interface. So there are a whole bunch of functions that are included with the database objects class. We're going to use the object list function. So that will open a connection to the database, select star from that table, grab all the results, put it into supplier objects, and return that list and close the connection. So we'll do get enumerator. And I might also clarify how it knows to create this supplier object. You can specify the item instance, which is the type that should be created. So you can specify type of supplier here. If for whatever reason you want to instantiate a different type, you could. But because I've specified this, it knows that type, and therefore this is not really necessary. The other option is also to override a function called item instance. So we'll just do that for clarity. So we'll create a new supplier, pass through this. So this is again not necessary. This function, this will automatically happen, but sometimes you in order to implement certain tables, certain types of polymorphism, you need to override this function. So I'll put a breakpoint there just to so we can step through that too. So anyway, we've got a suppliers object. That will then go off and map these supplier objects from each record and return that as a list. So we should be able to enumerate through this for each supplier, suppliers, and supplier. We'll just console out company name. And also put out a contact name as well. Let's put a read down here. I don't need to do that, did I? Set that up as a starting project. Okay, try again. Okay, let's just tidy this up a little bit. Okay, so let's create the Microsoft Access database object. Okay, so it's going to go after the table, enumerate through it, and it's going to create a supplier object. So this is going to be our first record. Create a supplier object, and that will map that field, those fields to the supplier object. Let's just run through this. Okay. Alright, so we've got a list here of the company names and the contact names. I think that was fairly simple. We can clean this up a little bit more as well. We can actually get rid of most of this code here. We can inherit from DatabaseObjects enumerable, which will automatically implement the IEnumerable implementation. So I can remember how to spell it. So we can get rid of this code. And we can actually get rid of this too. Just clean that up a bit. Okay. Okay, so yeah, we can clean that up a little bit. Not too much that can be changed there. So let's just run through that again, just to prove out that that can actually work. Okay, just run that. Okay, great. So that still works. Okay, so this is the end of the first video. On the next video, I'm going to cover off creating, reading, updating, deleting objects.